After 7 years of The Crown, the show has finally come to an end with part 2 of season 6, with part 1 being released a few weeks back and it being focused around the events that were leading towards the death of Diana. This second half of the season was focused around what occurred afterwards, a few years later, all the way up until 2005, finishing off when Charles and Camilla got married. So with that, I thought I'd explain the ending of the show, compare the events to what actually happened in real life, and let you know if it's any good. So let's get into it. Here is The Crown Season 6 Part 2 ending explained and real life events compared. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. This whole season was focused on a couple of main overarching themes. The Queen worrying about the public's perception of the royal family and her fear that they'd grown out of favour. William's resentment towards the press and the public due to him holding them responsible for the death of his mother, along with his blossoming relationship with Kate Middleton. And also the Queen's fear that she was getting too old and that she was on her way out, worrying that she wasn't good enough for the job anymore. Let's look at William's involvement first. As the season opened, we saw that William was still mourning his mother. He had a troubled relationship with his father because he was blaming him for what happened. And we also saw that he had pent up anger and resentment towards the public and the press for pretty much treating him in the invasive, intrusive way that his mother was treated by them. We saw that Charles tried to do all that he could in order to help his son with his grief, but it was falling on ears that just wouldn't listen or be persuaded. It was down to the Duke, Philip, to speak with William and to try and help him. Philip was doing this because we previously saw that it was mentioned about how Charles didn't have a great parent in Philip, and this was Philip's way of not only doing something for his son, something that he felt that he didn't do when he was younger, but it was also something that he was doing for his grandchild too, bringing William and Charles back together and mending the family. The meaning behind his motive was something that was shown to us when he was looking back at old notes, photos and video footage of when Charles was younger, showing a softer side to the often hard-exteriored individual. This was what essentially allowed William's mind to feel a little lighter and to have space within it before going off to university. The University of St. Andrews, the same uni which was mentioned in the show, and this was the place where we saw a large part of his story unfolding. The storyline of him meeting Kate Middleton. Within this arm of the show, it almost showed us the grounding of William, the growing up and the maturing that he underwent. We heard how he took a gap year and went travelling around the world, and Kate also did the same too. This was actually true and they went to a few of the same places. William cleaning the toilet is a famous photo that was known before, and that was shown to us in the show too. During Kate Middleton's time at university, we saw that she was with somebody called Rupert Finch, and this person does actually exist and was seeing Kate Middleton for a brief while, so that was correct. Whilst that was also going on in the show, William was said to be dating somebody called Lola Airedale Cavendish Kincaid, but that's actually something which is incorrect. Whilst at university, he dated somebody called Olivia Hunt. When William was a bit older and out of university, a previous ex-girlfriend of his was called Isabella Anstutha Gow Calthorpe. I'm butchering the names, I know it, but it seems like the four-barreled names of Lola could have been inspired by her. Also, a bonus fact in this is that in real life she ended up marrying Richard Branson's son, so she still got the bag. During William's time at university, we saw him undergoing change and his positioning of his viewpoint of the press and the public changing. He was the number one, and he knew that Harry was number two, something which was impacting Harry's behaviour. Harry had no purpose and was just finding himself in trouble, almost mirroring the lifestyle and behaviour that Margaret had in the seasons before, seeing as though she was the number two to Queen Elizabeth. This behaviour ultimately resulted in Harry wearing a certain uniform to a fancy dress party, which was something which also dominated the newspapers in real life too. William's time with the Queen was something which made him change his approach. The Queen said how a life lived in service is not a sacrifice, but it's an honour. Before she said this, he viewed his lifestyle and the press and the constant bombardment and attention as a consequence to sacrifices that he needed to make, when in reality he should have been viewing it as an honour and realised that he could have done good with all of that focus. So from there, he did change his approach and his outlook on life. A couple of other things about William's time at university that actually happened was that he did study the history of art along with Kate, and he did actually switch to geography whilst he was there. Both William and Kate did also stay in the same student halls too, but they did actually break up in 2007. The show didn't go that far, but if it did, that would have been something which we would have ended up finding out. William did attend the balcony of the Jubilee, but the layout wasn't structured the same, which makes me question the legitimacy of the Queen wanting him to be there for purposes of image and also modernity. Now let's take a look at the Queen's fear of the royal family losing favour. This was something which was even apparent at the end of the first part of season 6 of the show. We saw the Queen thinking about how Diana had got what she wanted following her death, with the public being outraged by the royal family's response. And this was something that was present throughout the late 90s and into the 2000s in reality. Following everything that happened with Diana, her death, and Charles's affair, the royal family's approval scores were pretty low, and the perfect viewpoint that people once had on the royal family was no more. So that was something which was pretty accurate. I would probably say that it was only towards the latter part of the 2000s where the image started to improve itself, with the likes of the younger generation coming through and taking the limelight away from the controversy. The very thing that we saw the Queen wanting William to do in the show. William's time at university, Charles and Camilla's wedding, Harry's tours in the army, and the lack of scandal was something which almost rebuilt public perception of the royal family long into the mid-2000s. And the foundations and groundwork was made for that at around the time where this final part of the season was set. This season of the show also highlighted how well loved Tony Blair was during the start of his term as Prime Minister. This was factually correct, as when he was elected, he achieved the biggest parliamentary majority in the history of the Labour Party. And also during the start of his tenure, he achieved his highest recorded approval ratings compared towards the end, where he received the lowest, showing how the newspaper headlines went from King Tony all the way to Tony Blair. In real life, he was also called things like Prime Monster, and the press also called him the most dangerous man in Britain. The Queen's dream of losing the crown and the public turning on her to the point where she was essentially overthrown and became a normal civilian was definitely an interesting moment, and it marked the paranoia that was in her mind. Something which in this final section we saw got put to bed and shifted towards the back of her mind. The fear of death and accepting fate. This section was probably one of my more favourite arms of this season of the show, with the show focusing on Operation London Bridge, which was the codename for the Queen's death. The actual codename in reality, we saw her funeral being something which was discussed along with Philip's funeral as well. This was a part of the story which made her feel like maybe it was time for her to step down as Queen and hand it down to Charles, somebody who was younger, in the prime of his life, and now had a wife by his side. During this conflict that she had, we saw that the previous iterations of Queen Elizabeth came back, and it was so well performed and integrated into the story. They represented the strong-willed part of her mind which was present when she was younger, and it reminded her of the duty that she had to uphold. And also that stepping down showed a sign of weakness in the monarchy, and that nobody else in the family was ready to step up and do a better job. The Queen was almost mourning her life and reign before it was even over at the age of 79, and as we know, she went on to live another 17 years from that and reign for them all, becoming the longest reigning monarch in history. As well as this, we witnessed Charles and Camilla's official blessing taking place by the Archbishop of Canterbury, which was something that did actually happen in reality following a civil ceremony. And then, following the Queen choosing not to announce that she was going to step down, she walked away and said a prayer in the chapel, St. George's Chapel inside Windsor. Within this moment, we heard that Sleep Dearie Sleep, the piece of music that the Sovereign's Piper actually played at the Queen's funeral and was mentioned in the show, was played out as the Queen looked up. As she walked out, she saw her coffin, which was in the middle of St. George's Chapel, the place where we saw it actually laying down in reality following her death. This was something that was occurring inside of her mind within the show. And then, as she walked out, Claire Foy appeared on one side of her, and Olivia Colman did on the other, both being iterations of the Queen from Season 1 to Season 4 of The Crown. And then, Imelda Staunton walked out of the chapel entrance with the door opening up and a light shining through, almost to symbolise the end, and to highlight that the Queen, although not dead in that moment in 2005, she was no longer with us now. Or it could simply be interpreted as though she was walking out into the light, where she'd continue to have a successful reign which spanned another 17 years, but it's probably up for interpretation. I like the idea that it's kind of a fitting tribute. Overall review. I thought this second part of Season 6 of The Crown was good, but I don't think it was good as the first 4 episodes, which covered the death of Diana. Whilst this had some good moments, there wasn't as much drama or controversy that occurred, so the stakes never felt truly high. We saw a lot of personal and intimate issues, which was very good for character building and getting close to them in understanding their minds, but I just don't feel like it landed with the impact. The death of Margaret was something that I thought was so well done, and it was actually quite emotional to watch. Watching them return to Buckingham Palace and Margaret in the modern day being alongside her, it was quite hard-hitting. I don't think this final season went out with a bang or landed with the impact that the former seasons did, but I think it went out in a way that was well suited to closing off the show whilst being respectful of the Queen, whilst also showing that there was still more to come in reality. One other thing that I'll briefly mention as well is the inquest that was done into Diana's death. It got a brief focus in the show, so I'll give it a brief one in the video. The conclusion that they came to was something which was actually the case in reality. However, it didn't happen as early as that. It happened in around 2008 to 2009, so it was slightly off in terms of the date, but I imagine the show just wanted to provide some sense of clarity and some resolution. So, there you have it. The Crown Season 6 Part 2 ending explained and real life events compared.